Welcome everyone. Thank you for joining us for today's webinar with FME and Migration Center, the leading provider in content migration services and products. Today we are presenting a very special decommissioning topic with the title Proper ECM Decommissioning to OpenText InfoArchive with Migration Center. Without further ado, let me introduce our speakers for today and then directly hand over to get started. Our first presenter today is Mike, Senior Pre-Sales Consultant at FME Germany. And in addition, Cosmin, Migration Center Consultant at FME Romania, will then conduct our live demo in the second part of the webinar. And with this, let me hand over to Mike to dive right into the webinar.
All right. Thank you, Mark, for the introduction. And welcome everybody to the webinar about how to proper decommission applications to InfoArchive using the Migration Center. Yeah, some words about the content. So we will show you who we are, the FME AG. We show you some use cases which the Migration Center can be used for, and then I tell you more about the Migration Center in a special use case, archive use case, and how to do the migration. And also we show you a practical demo of how to scan from various source systems and create zip files and ingest them into InfoArchive. Let's start. So about FME Group, yeah, we were founded in 1995. We have over 220 employees with a revenue of approximately 22 million a year. So we are helping customers with the digital transformation, especially in the life science industry, manufacturing, and also cross industry. Yeah, we do consulting, concept development, and maintenance. And also we do products, and that's why we are here today. So especially the Migration Center is our main product to migrate content from a platform to another. We have offices in Germany, in Romania, and USA, and also we have partners all over the world, especially with Migration Center we're working with. Use cases, or one solution for all. So here you see our use cases with Migration Center, which can be addressed during a migration. So most of you will already have a use case in mind, or actually as a requirement. So Migration Center can be used to migrate content in general, to extend application or replace legacy applications. Also consolidate applications or platforms, even to reduce the cost and the total cost of ownership. And then also there are other use cases, right? Like managing test data, import batch time scheduled migrations, for example, for a publishing platform, or even we have in-place adapters or connectors to reclassify content objects within one repository to increase the data quality and such. And today we are focusing on the archiving and decommissioning use case. So basically, an archive use case is more or less a migration. So you collect data and metadata from one platform, and you want to import or archive these data into another, right? So today we are focusing on InfoArchive. So it can also be used for a decommissioning use case, so that you do not do a whole big bang migration or archive scenario. You can decommission documents step by step, let's say time by time. So you do it on an attribute basis or whatever criteria you use over a time, brighter or wider time frame. So you can archive data from multiple systems, not only one. Migration Center is especially shining when we talk about multiple source and target platforms. Also you can archive emails, and also you can use the Migration Center to archive data to just back up the data and recover repositories later. Yeah, you may have heard that one already. So it's about, according to Gartner, it's about data and inactive and active data, right? So Gartner analysts said sometime that 60 to 80% of the data inside an existing repository in your company consists of like 20% active data and 80% inactive data, right? So inactive data means more or less that these are documents or other files which haven't been touched in the last time and will not be touched in the future. So those documents are more maybe related to a business process which has already been finished. So with other words, these documents do not need to stay in that repository. For example, a Documentum or a SharePoint, because they only there like as a static content which is not changed and will just like consume storage and maybe performance of the system. So that could be a reason to migrate those files and documents into an archive platform. Just, I mean, you need to keep it. You don't want to lose those documents and information, but they do not need to stay in the active repository, let's say. And yeah, here again, some use cases in more detail. So as I already mentioned, we have the classic content migration, and here it's about to separate and relocate static valuable content, right? So that's exactly where the Migration Center can help you. So to not migrate just all the documents inside one repository, but really decide on attribute values or other criteria to split the content into 2 different migration paths. For example, you just may say that 20% of the documents may stay in the active repository, of course. But it can also be used to separate the content during the migration phase to say this content with those data will go into the archive solution, to InfoArchive, and all the other documents we might migrate into another platform, or even if into the same platform but with a different version, for example. So that can be done from classic ECM systems, and also, of course, from file sharing archives, or let's say file shares, right? You may have already file shares which really have many documents on it. So in every enterprise or company, I see many file shares with many files on it, which are not really in a good shape. Let's say the data quality is not there. It doesn't even meet any requirements, right? So that could be the case. But on the other hand, if you ask the users which are working with those files, if you want to like delete those files or just migrate them into any repository, it might be a difficult task. And so a use case could be to just collect all the documents from a file share and put them into an InfoArchive to really like have control on the files, so they are searchable and they do not get lost at any time, right? The file share is not a secure storage. So that's the case. Maybe they are more secure in an archive system. And then, yeah, application decommissioning and migration. We will show you that in the demo also. That's a typical case we all know. And also with consolidation. I already touched that topic. So you can scan several different platforms with Migration Center, consolidate the data, and then decide where the data should go. For example, to an archive system and to another repository. Okay, let's come to the Migration Center or the product details more or less. So why Migration Center? Migration Center is a product, right? It's a 100% out of the box content migration platform. So you typically purchase the product or lease it and then install it on your premises, and then you can start with the migration. You don't need to have any programming skills or know-how, because you don't need to do any scripting or development at all. You don't even need to go into XML files to define the transformation mapping or something else. Everything is done with the client, where you can more or less click together the transformation rules and attribute mapping rules, and also scanners and importers to do the whole migration with the client. We have been over 13 years on the market, where we have 160 plus migration paths or multiple platforms. You will see that in one of the next slides. We have many different connectors for different source and target system, and that's really one USP of the Migration Center, because you use the Migration Center the same way for every different platform. So you can really connect to many of different ones and get all the data into into the Migration Center, and then, if you like, into one other repository to consolidate it. Another USP, which is quite big, is the no downtime USP, right? It works without any kind of interrupting the business or technically the platforms. So you can do the migration while users still working on the active system and doing changes and adding new documents. Migration Center will keep track on the status and on the different level of information, and will then just do a delta scan, if you like, to do a delta import after all on a weekend or something. So you really can do a migration with no downtime. Yeah, another thing I want to mention here is we are fit for regulated systems. So that means we using, or the pharmaceutical industry is using the migration center a lot, and that just tells me and you that we have like we are really fit for regulated systems. So that means we, in terms of audits and stuff, the migration center is more or less proof, or has proven in different projects in pharmaceutical industries to get the work done, and also in a safe and secure way, right? So that documents will not be lost on the way from A to B, and can be checked with MD5 checksums or other tools to really make sure that the data was migrated successfully, and all the data was migrated, and nothing get lost in the middle. So how can we reduce the cost? You will see that in the next 2 slides. So we think with Migration Center as a product, we can really help you to save costs, right? We say, okay, like 60 to 80% cost or time can be saved during a project, because you don't need to hassle with any scripting, development, testing, or validation of any tools you use. You just use the Migration Center, which has best practices and is proven in many projects. You install the product, and then you can start working on it, also with our help, with trainings, and also we can do some migrations for you with the product. And yeah, you get reliable numbers and facts and figures for the project duration. You know, most of the risk up front, so you really have lower risk, and until maybe to no risk. So for your big migration, which is coming maybe. So how we do that, I just told you already. Like here's an example where you have a project without the migration center. So you typically have the phases: conception and planning, it's ECM setup, configuration, customization. Then you may have migration script development and testing, and here's really development required, and also validation and testing until you really have the desired results, right? So when we're talking about migrations and a lot of documents, like millions or billions, I mean, of course, 90% of those documents can be migrated with one formula quite easily, let's say, but in this 10%, let's say, there are like risk and different errors, and here and there can be many things. So you need to retest the development, the script, and the tools for the content migration very often, and most of the times it takes really time. And here's an example with Migration Center where we shorten most of the phases already. Like conception and planning could be shorter, because you can use our best practices, our experience basically with the product in projects. Yeah, then we have the ECM setup, which is the same basically, right? You need to do the same configuration and setup for those things. But then we also have already have green phases here where you don't need any development and scripting and testing, right? That's not required. You don't need to do any kind of that, because it's product based. We do the content migration, which is without testing and validation and stuff. It is very short. Then we have an acceptance test, which can be shortened through automatic testing and validation inside the product. And then we have the go live, yeah, very faster, let's say. So at the end, you save time and money. It must not be 80 or 60%. It definitely depends on the projects and volume and requirements. But we really think and know more or less that you can save time and money. Yeah, here you see the Migration Center, a little bit technical diagram. It's not really technical, but it shows you these 3 components of the Migration Center. So it works with 3 components. One is the database and content store component. It's a central database, which is holding or storing all the information about configuration, and also the extracted metadata from the corresponding source platforms, and also the data for after the import. So yeah, basically it's our brain in the product setup, but it's also a tool for all the information for audit information and so on. So you see one that which migration or scan or particular import was happening, and when and how, right? Then you have a client or several clients to configure the whole thing. And then you have on the left-hand side, on the right-hand side, you have the so-called job server, which is including our connectors. So we have the source connectors on the left-hand side, where you see an OpenText for content server, Documentum, D2, DCM, XCP, eDocs, and eRoom, also for Microsoft emails or SharePoint. IBM FileNet, or even emails, notes, and Domino, and also a Fresco and some others. And on the right-hand side, you see the target connectors, which is more or less the same. So we support the big vendors, and we are also often certified by the vendors because we are using the official APIs for the corresponding systems. Yeah, when it says here custom system at the bottom, so that means when we do not have a distinct adapter for your legacy application you want to migrate from or archive from, we can always build a new connector if that's needed, let's say, to collect all the data from the corresponding source platform. And that's also the way the Migration Center grew within the last 10 years, right? So we started with some connectors only, and then it grew by the terms of count of connectors. We also can improve one distinct connector if we have one connector, but it does not support you completely with your requirements. We can also adapt, or you or partners actually, adapt the connector's code and then make it happen that it supports your requirements. And here we have a typical architecture diagram, or let's say an example setup. So this migration center here is set up with two databases. So if you have a really large migration and a lot of documents or terabyte, you can also use one or more migration center database instances, right? You see them in the middle. On the top, you have the different migration center clients. So you typically can use one, and also different and many people can work on the migration, on the configuration and such. So you can also use many different clients. So, and then we have the job server, which is also seen in the bottom middle. The job server is our processing unit. So this is really a Java service running on Windows or Linux as a daemon. It is a background processing service. So this is responsible for scanning and the data, so extracting documents from the source system to a file server or storage server, and extracting all the metadata from the source system into the migration center database. So here you see 4 job servers. So with other words, this is our scalable unit, besides the database instance, of course. So you can install as many job servers as you need to increase the performance of the whole migration. And at the end of the day, most of the times, the bottleneck is really the corresponding systems, and most of those times, the target system is the slowest system, let's say the bottleneck. So Migration Center can really be scaled up until it meets the performance or the speed, let's say, for the target system to create objects. Yeah, other outstanding capabilities, very briefly said. So we have a huge metadata transformation engine. So Migration Center really shines in terms of metadata transformation. If you can imagine, when we come from very different source systems like a SharePoint, Documentum, and a content server, they all share like a common a sense in the middle, like they all Documentum storing systems, right? But they're all different in other ways than here and there. So we need to transform the data wherever it comes from and put it in a kind of neutralized store, so stored in our database. And then we use a huge transformation engine, which is clicked together in functions and rules. You will see that in the demo, really to transform the data to be ready for the target system. In terms of InfoArchive, those structure and attributes can also be configured very flexible in InfoArchive. So you know we have to meet those requirements. So also in Migration Center, the transformation is very flexible. Then we also have real-time simulation and test, and that's really useful because it saves a lot of time. With other words, when you did a transformation of the metadata and an attribute mapping for the new system, you can already validate the attribute values in the Migration Center. So you can make sure that those values you newly transformed, maybe together with the business users, really meet the criteria of the new object type definitions in the target system, right? Or of the XML structure definition in InfoArchive. So that means you can validate in terms of length, minimum maximum length on mandatory attributes, but also with regular expression, you can really validate on a really certain level, like the first character must be uppercase character or something like that. So that really helps you to make sure the data in terms of the attribute values will fit into the target system, and that it can be done without even touching the target system or try and import or something like that. So you can really click a button in Migration Center, it will be done in the database, and then the values are like ready to go into the target system. Yeah, I already told you about these Delta migrations. That's for sure a huge outstanding capability. And maybe also we can talk about the in-place upgrade migration. So that's not for InfoArchive, but that's something interesting in terms you want to, for example, you want to archive from an existing repository, but the data quality already in there is not really good, let's say, right? So you could use the Migration Center before you actually do the archive migration, so migrate or archive the documents from there with a bad quality into InfoArchive. You could do an in-place upgrade before. That means you scan the data in an existing repository, and then you enhance the data from external sources or just with transformation rules and logic to enhance or increase the quality in the existing repository, right? So that can be really helpful, because then you can do like an easy migration or archive to another system or InfoArchive, and you can already ensure before you do that migration that you have good data quality in place. So that's definitely a use case. Okay, we come close to the demo, so let's have a look to the step-by-step migration. So what we call step-by-step is that we differentiate from a typical ETL tool, like an extract, transform, and load in one big bang maybe tool. We differentiate us from them, so we say we do a step-by-step migration. And that means we have divided the phases into 6. And this is the analyze, the organize, transform, validate, and import phase. And even after the import phase, the Migration Center supports you with the whole process, because error documents will be fetched by Migration Center and then like more or less again in the organize or transform step. So we go into them and each of them individually in detail. So we start with the analyze and extract phase. I already told you most of it. So we connect to a source system. We extract the data, the content on a file store, and the metadata into the database. Those source systems can be various. So we also can scan databases, file shares, and of course content management systems. And then we have the data in Migration Center ready for the analyze, let's say. So with that, we jump into the demo. This is the first part of the practical demo. So I will switch to presenter.
Thank you, Mike. Let me share my screen. Okay, so jumping into the demo directly. So what you are seeing right now is the Migration Center client window. I am connected with the client window to our core, so the Oracle instance, the database. And I also have several job servers configured, and I will be using them during the demo. So using the step-by-step migration that Mike has already discussed, we start with the analyze phase. So that means we need to go to the scanner windows to configure a scanner which will connect to the source system to collect the objects. In order to configure a new scanner, we just click on the new button. We specify a name for the scanner. We select a type, and then we specify a job server where we want this scan to run. These can be changed, the name and the location later on. After we select the adapter type, we can see that the list below has been populated with several parameters. And these parameters will be different depending on the adapter type which we select. And let me just open one that I've configured earlier. So for this scanner configuration, we're going to connect to a Documentum system. So we have some basic authentication details. We specify which repository we want to use, and then this is the cabinet that we will be scanning. And of course, the scanner also has a lot of other parameters for different options which you can choose to enable or disable depending on your needs. What is important is that we have this export location parameter. which specifies where exactly the content will be stored for so which staging area to use. In our case, we're going to use a file share folder here, and that's where the content is going to get exported. Okay, so after you're done with specifying the parameters, we're ready to save the scanner. And all you have to do afterwards to start scanning is just click on Run and start a new scan. And you will see the status has changed here to running. You can also go to the Jobs view, and here you will see a list of all the scanners that are currently running. I also have prepared 2 other systems for scanning for this demo. So we have a file system scanner, which will connect data from a file share, from a Windows file share. And then we also have a SharePoint scanner, which will connect to the SharePoint environment and collect some documents and metadata from there. And we do the same as we did with the first scanner. We just start it, just click on Run. And we can see that the first 2 scanners have already finished scanning. So you see the status here. We can take a look at each individual scanner's history. So here we see we have 1 scan run for this scanner configuration with 205 objects scanned. And we can even take a look at these scanned objects by clicking on the View Scanned Source Objects button. So what we are seeing here is basically for each row we have an object from the source system. That includes individual versions, which are scanned individually, and the relationship between the version tree is kept. And then we have some system columns, internal migration center columns, and then after that we have a column for each source attribute that was available for the scanner to collect. And you can go and see exactly what objects you got scanned, what metadata you have in that particular location where you scanned. You can even export this to a CSV file and send it, forward it to somebody else in your company. Okay, so going back to the scanners, all our free scanners are now finished, and I will hand the share screen back to Mike to continue with the presentation, and we'll be back to continue our demo.
All right, thank you, Cosmin, for the first part of the demo. Pretty good. So now we have, you saw it, we have collected the data, the scanners and the metadata inside the migration center. So more or less, you could switch off the source system right now because we have created kind of a snapshot from the source system. So we have all the metadata and documents, show everything what we need. Okay, so we would go, and you will see that in the demo then after I showed you the slides. We will go into the organize phase, and that is a little bit related to step-by-step and also set-by-set approach. So when we have scanned the data from various different source systems, we can now, or we have to create migration sets, right? Or in short, mix sets. And in those mix sets, you can decide you can decide the scope of documents to put into that migration set. And one migration set has also one let's say, set of transformation rules. So in that way, you can really organize the whole migration. You don't need to do a big bang at all, but you could do. And also you can separate the documents by any attribute you find in the source. For example, to prioritize certain type of documents or documents which are in a special or specified folder or from a specified department here, or even if you say, okay, the modified date, maybe the documents which haven't been touched in the last 5 years, they can go into that mix set, which and that mix set will go into InfoArchive, for example, right, with specific transformation rules. So you are absolutely flexible to do that, and you can organize the whole migration as you really need it. Yeah, as I said, you can choose the scope of documents. So here also I refer to the splitting of active and inactive content. So that's also the place or the way you can do it with Migration Center, that you may now add, for example, these 3 systems, you may add them into a mix set, and in that mix set you may say, okay, these type of documents which have those attribute or attribute values in common will go into that mix set, which is then migrated into an ECM system, and all the others, for example, all other PDF files will go into an into InfoArchive, right? And you can really use any kind of source information you have scanned, so basically everything which is there. You also can do a PDF transformation. So for example, if you have Word documents and you choose to archive those Word documents, you may want to have them in a PDF format. That's pretty common, let's say. We also have tools and also partners in place where we offer a transformation of content to, for example, rendering to PDF, especially into InfoArchive. We can also shrink the size of PDF and to make it smaller PDFs and store them in InfoArchive, because you want to store them for years, right? And who knows if Word is still existent in 30 or 300 years. Okay, the next step after organize, so now we put all the documents into mix sets. So we choose the scope of documents we want to process with transformation rules next. We would then create transformation rules. And Cosmin will show you that briefly. You can create the transformation rules very easily and quickly with some clicks. And also you can reuse those transformation rules and save those transformation rules and so on. So you need to do that work only once, more or less. So transformation rules means you change or manipulate the attribute values, if you like, and you also map, do an attribute mapping. So you map the values to the new values, to the new object type definition of the target system. So in that way, you can really do everything with the data. You can enhance the data with different external sources and information. You can consolidate attributes, like merge different attributes into one, or substrings like split attributes into several, and so on and so on. You can really do everything what you need. Typically there is a user mapping where you have, for example, old users or like old technical users which the persons are not working anymore in the enterprise. You can map those values within a user mapping, and then also choose like if and else and so on to have a fallback value, for example, for users which are not existing in the new platform anymore, right? Just as an example. So that's really the transformation and mapping, which is done inside that transform and map phase. So after that phase, and we won't show that today in the demo because of time reasons, so we don't have enough time to show the whole validation, but just briefly explained is that what I already touched today, we validate the newly transformed metadata against the information from the target system. Right? Once you enter those information into the migration center, you can click the validate button, which will be done later. And that will just do the validation inside the database in the background very quickly for many documents. And we'll just say, okay, this like metadata is correct. But the date attribute, for example, is not a date value here, right? Like in that example. Or this value is extending in terms of the length of the attribute values, right? Or a mandatory attribute is not set. So once you discover such an mistake, maybe you did something wrong in the transformation rules, or the business users did give you a wrong transformation or mapping table, you just go back, like revert the transformation, and then just change rules and the transformation, and then just click the transformation button again, right? So that's what we mean previous with the correct errors, let's say, with the phases. So you just go forth and back in between transform, validate, and even, if you like, import, until you have really reached like the desired result and everything is validated at this point, and then later it's imported, right? So Migration Center really supports you in the whole process, going forth and back into those changes. So you will not lose any kind of information at any stage. Migration Center also always keeps track of the document's individual status, let's say. Okay, once the data is validated, you are going to import the data or archive the data. So then again, you have this set-by-set approach. So you can decide where to go with the document. So you can import or ingest those into an InfoArchive, or migrate those documents into a file share or into content management system. You can even duplicate the data if you like that. For test data, it makes sense, and import a mix set twice, right? It makes sense in very small scenarios, let's say. kind rare, but you can migrate those data into an ECM, and you might migrate the data also on a file share for whatever reason. So Migration Center is totally flexible to help you there with your task within any migration requirements. Yeah, speaking about import, let's see how it can be done practically with Migration Center in the demo.
Okay, so picking up right where we left, we have finished scanning, and now we are ready to organize our data into migration sets. So we go to the migration set window. Quickly, I will show you how to create a new migration set. So you just click the new button. You specify a name for this migration set, and then you specify a migration path. So the migration path is basically the source to target connection. So in our case, this would be, for example, a Documentum to InfoArchive document migration path. But let me just open the one I've already prepared to save time. So we have our name, we have Documentum to InfoArchive document. And then in the next tab, we are able to select the scan runs. So you can see we have only one scan run available here, which is the one we just previously performed from Documentum. We can select the scan run by double-clicking or clicking the button here. And before actually locking the objects into this migration set so it cannot be selected by other migration sets, we have some options of filtering. So we have two options for filtering the objects. The first one is the simplest one, which is basically an exclusion filter. And we are able to exclude objects with certain values for their attributes. And then we have a more advanced filter, which works on a rule-based system. And here you can create certain rules, such as, for example, objects which only have the modified date greater than a certain date, or smaller than a certain date can go in a specific location, and so on. And here you can create more rules however you would like to filter the data. But for the purpose of the demo, we'll just select all of our objects. So we just click on the select objects button, and then the selections will happen in the background. We can see that for this particular mix set, we have 205 objects total, and then we have several columns to indicate the status or the state of these objects currently. So right now they are unprocessed, and as we move on through the migration steps, you'll see these objects move from one state to another until they are eventually imported. Good. We will do the same thing for the other migration sets. So we have our file system migration set, which is getting selected now. And then we have our SharePoint migration set with a few objects there. And now we have all three of the migration sets populated with scan runs. If I didn't mention, you can select, of course, multiple scan runs in one particular migration set. And using the filtering option, you can split one scan run into multiple migration sets as well. Okay, so after you're done with organizing your objects into migration sets, we're ready to move on to the transformation rules. So we click on the Edit Transformation Rules button. Let me just click on Apply so we have that cleared. Okay, so what transformation rules are, as the name suggests, they are rules by which the metadata gets transformed. So you create a new transformation rule here. You can specify a name for the transformation rule, and then below inside the rule, so with the rule selected, we have a wide array of transformation functions or methods, which at their core are basically string manipulation functions, and these allow you to get source metadata and transform it into target metadata in the Migration Center database. So basically defining and manipulating the metadata to get the results that you need. And we can see here we have some basic ones, such as getting the value as it is in the source system, so in the source objects, or we can apply some regular expressions to extract different parts, and we have different options. You can pretty much do whatever you want with the metadata. Below the transformation rules, we have some system rules or system attributes, and they work in the same way as the regular transformation rules, except they have a fixed name because they serve a specific purpose. So in the case of InfoArchive, we have all the necessary metadata that needs to be set in the SIP XML files, and of course some custom ones for migration centers use. So after you specify which rules or how the rules are gonna change the metadata, you just need to save the mixset, and then you just apply transformation, and then you see the objects have moved from the unprocessed to the transformed state. And now if we take a look at the processed objects instead of the source objects, we're going to see the results of the transformation rule. So basically we're going to see a preview of everything that's going to get set in the XML files for InfoArchive in each zip file. So this is the metadata. You can take a look. If something is not according to how it should be, you can re-edit the transformation rules, change something here, and then you just reset the objects and transform them again until everything looks good. Before these objects are actually ready to be imported, we also need to apply validation, as Mike mentioned. So I'm going to apply transformation validation to the other mixsets as well. So now we have 3 mixsets from 3 different source systems, which have objects that have been transformed and validated, and their data is ready to be moved, basically to be imported into InfoArchive. With that being said, we go to the importers window. And the importer window is very similar to the scanner window. So we have our similar interface here with the name, adapter type, and the job server location where this will run. And of course, we have some different parameters because this is related to the InfoArchive system. And we're going to generate our SIPs in this particular target location. And we have several other options here that we're not going to get into right now. What's different from the scanner window is the mixsets tab. So here we see the 3 mixsets which we have just seen earlier, and because they have validated objects, they're going to appear here, and only the validated objects are going to be processed for the import. So we just need to select these mixsets to be processed by this importer, and just like we did with the scanner, we just save everything, and when we're ready, we can just click on run. Now, after we click on run, we can see the status has changed to running. We go to the history view to see the history of the scan run, and we see objects have already started being processed. We can also take a look in the migration sets view, and here we will see the overview as well, moving objects from the validated state into the imported state. And once these have finished importing, we can take a look at the target location. So I have opened here a file transfer. So these are the 3 SIPs that were just now created. We can take a look. Maybe I should just open it in here directly. Okay, so we can take a look at the generated objects. Oh, there we go. And we see we have our 2 XML files. So we have the first, the SIP XML file, which contains the whole archive unit information, which were set by the system rules, which I showed earlier. And then we also have the PDI XML file, which contains the actual metadata for each individual document or object, according to our transformation rules. And then, of course, we have the content of each of the objects which were imported. Now, after this is done, the SIP files now are ready to be ingested into InfoArchive. So I opened this by mistake. Okay, so let's just take one of these SIP files and move them into a place where it's accessible by InfoArchive. So this can be done automatically if you have everything mounted properly. And now I have already prepared a InfoArchive shell to ingest this zip file. So we click on we select receive, we enumerate to see our zip being properly received, and then we just ingest the file, and the SIP file was ingested. And now we can check the application, and if we search for the objects, we should be able to see all our objects being ingested with all the metadata and everything successfully ingested. So that is basically how you decommission applications to InfoArchive using Migration Center. Thank you.
Great, thank you very much. Okay, so now we completed thanks to Cosmin, we completed the demo part 2. So we, very quickly, I must say, right, it is a lot of information to digest, but we saw very briefly, we create migration sets, we create transformation rules, and then do the validation, and then do the import, the creation of zip files. And in this case, we ingested the zip files manually via the shell, but that could also be triggered by a post-processing or in a script, right? Okay, just some more detailed information about what we just did, or how the Migration Center is creating those zip files, right? You may be familiar with it, so I just want to mention it. So no matter where the data is coming from, we go through the Migration Center processes, and then we create the zip file accordingly with the 2 XML files, the EAS SIP and EAS PDI file, and all the content to it, right? As I said, we can also transform the content, and also we can change the structure of the XML file in any way the holding is configured on the InfoArchive site. Here again, just for practical overview, like Cosmin said it, we have the DSS, the system attributes more or less in the Migration Center here at 1, which are going to the EAS SIP XML, so more or less the system attributes for InfoArchive. We also can do sequential SIPs and splitting of the zip files accordingly to the requirements of InfoArchive. And then at the 2, we have the custom attributes, which can be coming from any system, and they will go through a mapping and your transformation rules, and then end up in the EAS PDI file. So, and also, I mean, you just saw that in the demo also, and some words about the import or the creation of the zip file, because that is like behind the scenes. The importer in the Migration Center importer or zip creator also does an XSL transformation. So you get the required XML structure, right? So what I mean was you can configure the holding in InfoArchive very flexible, and the structure could be looking very different. The configuration is flexible there. So we have the XSL transformation to also fulfill the requirements and meet that structure, right? And also we have the XSD validation. So you can more or less basically take the holding XSD, which was used to create and configure the holding. We use that file also to validate the XML structure in terms, not in terms of attribute values, but in terms of the XML structure, right? And so once a zip is created and through no errors in Migration Center, we really make sure that this zip file is 99% or even 100 going to be ingested into InfoArchive with no errors, right? So also that is very helpful to make sure that the file is ready to be ingested without even trying or touching the target system. And optional, you can also have a post-processing to trigger the ingestion process. So this is not done by Migration Center, but you can configure it in the importer to trigger the next process to take up the file and do the ingestion process. So we have done that in project as well. Okay, now some more slides, not many, just about the license model. So, and very briefly, so Migration Center is not licensed upon the size of the documents or the count of documents, right? Which many of our competitors are doing. Migration Center license model is really simple. You have one core license. This is the things here in red, like the database, the job servers, as many as you want, and the clients, as many as you want. So it's one database core. And then the additional license part is the Migration Center pass, which is then, for example, Documentum to InfoArchive or File System to InfoArchive. So each pass is to be added up to it. So at the end, you have a core and a migration pass and a support fee on that. And you have even two options. You can purchase a Migration Center and you pay support per year, or you lease the Migration Center for 1 year or 2 years and only pay support for that. So we are absolutely flexible with that. And the model is, the license model is really easy. Yeah, also we do offer migration services. So this webinar is not about services, but just to let you know. So we also, the FME also has the service offerings to do everything around InfoArchive and also the migration and validation and everything's around it. So this is just to mention, if you like, we can also help you with the whole project, let's say, but we can also do, our product team are really wants to help you to get onboarded for the ramp up phase. So we help you at the start with Migration Center, with trainings or with the installation, or also, of course, we have the support more or less 24 hours running. So if you have any questions, you can just ask us. We'll support. Okay, that's from my side. Thank you very much for watching. And if you have any questions, yeah, reach out to us and see you around.
Okay, thank you, Cosmin. Thank you, Mike, for the great presentation and demo. We are almost at the end of our today's webinar session. To round it off, just one more slide about our dedicated product website, which is migration-center.com. And everything that has been presented as of now, you can find on there in much more detail. And in addition to that, the just before mentioned service portfolio, of course, some success stories, some references from former customers. You can also find our past webinars as recordings on our website, and we have a pretty good content migration blog on there as well. And most importantly, we offer a free trial version of Migration Center. It's the so-called free evaluation copy, and it's Migration Center with 100% of functionality, just limited to a 14-day time frame. So if you want to test out Migration Center to see if it suits your decommissioning use case, just go to our website and you should see a little pop-up on your right-hand side where you can request your individual copy. And then it's this time of year again, we have our year-end offering running, which means that the first year of support is free of charge for all new perpetual licenses. And yeah, it looks like there's nothing else we need to cover before we wrap up. So should you have any further inquiries, like Mike just told you, often coming up after the session, just contact us through our email address, which is info@migration-center.com. And yeah, great. Thank you, everyone. We appreciate you being here. Thanks again for joining us today. And we hope we'll see you again next time. And always remember, it's Migration Center you love to work with. Thank you. Have a great day and bye-bye.